is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, covering The Dark Tower, Book 7, The Dark Tower, Part 2, Chapters 3, 4, and 5. In these chapters, well, that is a really, really anticlimactic end for a villain that I expected more from. And also, being a breaker doesn't seem so bad. Welcome to Unspoiled.
Glad you read it the same way.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Natasha.
I'm Miles.
And yeah, I can't, I'm still getting over my surprise.
Yeah.
I just don't, I guess I just expected more from this guy. And I guess, it's supposed to be, well, he's aging. Is the explanation that's given in this chapter.
Well, he just turned stupid in his old age.
I just don't really know what to make of it.
The first time I read this book, we've been talking about kind of the weird things about it and the things we don't really dig or think is having too much, and I was experiencing all of that. But this was the first time where I was like, what are we doing? Because Walter going out like that, having not appeared in this book at all, I think he's barely appeared in this book and the last two.
Mm-hmm.
He's maybe shown up for a minute, or in a flashback or something.
Right.
Because I think Callahan, when Callahan is telling a story, Walter shows up in that story. And, when Mia is telling her story, she talks about him. But in terms of, actually showing up, this is the last time we've seen him since Wizard and Glass.
Right.
And for him to just show up and, be Walter again, and then just, get it.
I just don't understand, I'm not even mad. I'm just kind of baffled. Why bring him back at all? If you're gonna, it feels almost because there's this thing with, Mordred eats him and gets his, knowledge, right?
Yes. He eats his brains and gains his knowledge. And
which, we're told is, a temporary thing. Basically,
right.
It lasts as long as it takes to digest whomever you ate.
Right.
But he gets... It almost feels like King felt that Walter was too human, and he regretted it, and so he decided to, have Mordred sort of take his place because he needed somebody a little bit more wild and terrifying, but he needed that whoever took his spot to have some of the knowledge that Walter had. So he found this real, backward way to do that. But I don't see evidence that the knowledge he has is really worthwhile yet. So if that's the case, I don't know. I don't see it. And even if that were the case, have Mordred track him down somehow, or have the stakes feel like anything, because this guy literally falls into Mordred's lap.
Yeah, he just walks in and he's like, I've got a machine on my head. He can't read my thoughts. And Mordred's like, that was interesting that you thought that, Munch.
Right.
That's it, basically.
And the fact that this guy that the only explanation that we're being given is that, well, he's gotten older and he's a little too cocky now.
Well, I
just can't really buy that.
I think here's my issue. The first part of it is that, I mean, I should say, like, what probably also helped, like, with this feeling when I was reading this is that I was reading this right as the movie was coming out.
Okay.
Right around that time, like, right before, right after. And so, you know, and Matthew McConaughey was cast as Walter, right? Mm-hmm. And, like, he's the villain of the piece. And, of course, that feels right. Because Walter feels like the villain of the piece. I mean,
right.
The celebrated, like, not just the first line, but the celebrated first line of the gunslinger. Like, the one that he even, like when they meet King in Book 6, King's like, that was a great first line.
Yep.
You know, is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed.
Yeah.
And for one of the two characters in that first line to just go out like a fucking punk like this.
Yeah.
In, like, for no apparent reason, in really anticlimactic fashion, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like... And I found Walter way scarier than fucking Mordred.
I think this is the thing, is that, like I said, I feel like King wants somebody more fantastical as his big bad, but I don't feel like he's understanding what is scary to us. It's not like, yeah, okay, the kid can turn into a spider, that's gross. Is that intimidating? No, not exactly, because we know he's super vulnerable in both states.
Right, like if Susanna hadn't tripped, she would have killed him already.
Yeah, you know? I don't know, I really feel like there's something here that's just a disconnect between what King has in mind and how the audience has actually interpreted what he's put down in front of us. Like, I feel like he's just seeing things from a perspective that isn't the case for practically anybody else. Like, and this is the sort of thing that I imagine has to happen pretty often, right? But this is such a dramatic break that even though plenty of authors, I would feel like, would make this kind of mistake where they get attached to some idea or some character that nobody else really cares about and focuses on it way too much, this is a big, big move to make. Where you're going to pull this guy out who was in the very first fucking sentence and just have him somehow have disintegrated from this, like, wizard / necromancer / shaman weirdo.
Yeah, whatever
into
he was.
Just like a used car salesman.
Yeah. And like the fact that we get his perspective is awful. Mm-hmm. And I hate it. If George R. R. Martin ever, like, wrote or writes in a chapter, like, that's from Littlefinger's perspective, it'll be the dumbest thing in the world.
Or, like, a perspective from one of the dragons.
I mean, yes, like, that too. But, like, or from Varys, or from, like, anybody who...
There should be some mystique.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And, like... And Walter, like, the last time we saw this guy was the reveal, like, before we knew any of this shit about Callahan, before we knew any of the shit about the writer and the fucking beams breaking and any of it. Like, before we knew any of that, we knew that fucking Walter was Randall Flagg from The Stand.
Right.
And that was huge. That was like, wait, what? Like, how the fuck did you show up here? And
well,
Randall
I mean,
Flagg
for you, for me, it meant nothing.
Well, but. Sure. But, like, right. But, you know, but Randall Flagg, without spoiling The Stand for you, is fucking terrifying. Like, he's not a pleasant person. And right. He's not, you know, and to combine him with the character of Walter, who already has this tremendous mystique going on, and then to just, like, to humanize him so much in a single chapter to be like, all right, not only are we in his head, thinking his thoughts, getting his motivations for no apparent reason, but then he proceeds to basically, like, explain his entire presence in the book. Like, he's like, oh, well, you wonder what happened between books 1 and 2, I see. Well, let me tell you, I used a cunning form of trickery, and I'm actually not that powerful at all. I'm just really a smart guy who kind of gets by. And, you know, I did a wonderful thing, and then I went and did this, and he did this, and now I'm here. And it's like, oh, God, like, he just humanizes him to death and then literally kills him.
Yeah, I don't like somebody that I at least respected, even if I wasn't that scared of him exactly yet. I respected him and felt like I might not be scared, but I feel like that's because this guy is only showing me like 60%, 50% of what he can actually do. And then we're getting him supposedly here at kind of 100%.
Yeah.
Where he's so desperate and he's so, like, he's trying so hard to not show fear. And the very first thing we find out is that he's certain that this thinking cap works, and we find out that it does not.
In a
which
heartbeat.
Just undermines everything right from the word go.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like the same character. Like, there's a part of me that up until a little bit later when King really hammers home, well, he made that mistake, but he wouldn't make any more mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I was sort of hoping maybe this wasn't actually him.
Mm.
And that this was all a big, like, okie doke. But then once King, like, said a couple things certain ways, I was like, no, I guess that is all there is.
It doesn't feel like the same character, and honestly, that's been a pretty consistent problem since the 5th book started, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, like, it really does. You know, we've talked a lot about how Susanna doesn't feel like the same character, and Jake, you know, sometimes doesn't feel like the same character, and, you know, it just... What's frustrating about this book to me that's less frustrating about the last 2 is that this book starts tying up loose ends, at least in this case. Like, this is an example of this book tying up Walter as a fucking loose end that really confirms to you that King decided that in order to finish this series, he basically had to retcon a lot of shit and, like, go in a completely different direction that didn't really gel with what he was doing before.
Right.
And it's just disappointing, you know? It's disappointing for people who really like the first 4 books and want the recognition that King also likes those books and cares about those books and cares about how people feel about those books, and, you know, is not just going to be like, well, God, those sucked, didn't they? Okay, right. Moving on. You know, we're going to do something else now with the same characters. And I'm not saying, and that's, like, exaggerating a little bit, but this is kind of how I feel like people who hate the last 2 Game of Thrones books, who hate Feast and Dance, like, and feel like they're a total shift away from the first 3 books, which I am not one of those people. But this must be how they feel, right?
Right.
Like, we've been, you know, not even like we've been disrespected, but like, man, you know.
You led me on a little bit.
Yeah, and I thought your work was really good. Why did you change it? Mm-hmm. You know, like, why did you go in a different direction? I don't know. I mean, this was like the first, Walter's death was the first time where I was really heavily, like, disappointed. Like, oh, you really are doing something different. Like, this is not going to wrap back around in a satisfying way to meet up with books 1 through 4. Like, this is going to be something truly separate, in a way. And it's sad.
Yeah, I think the way that you said at the start, really, like you're saying, the way that he feels like he has to get him out of the way, and that's exactly what it is it's so perfunctory that it feels like he just needed to check off. It happened. Seeing him again after not seeing him for, what, 3 books? Is it? 2?
2. I mean, 2.5, right?
And him dying happens within 1 chapter.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Like, at least have him be around a bit and then have him be like, all right, you served your purpose. I don't need you anymore. But to have him reappear, and also we're supposed to believe that somehow he's like, with his age, basically gotten stupider. Mm-hmm. Whereas Roland's just got a little bit of arthritis. You know, like, that's really, it's just so weak. And it's feeble, Stephen. It's feeble. I don't care for it.
It's feeble. It's a good word for it. We should probably mention somewhere in this discussion that we learn in this chapter that Walter really just wants what Roland wants, which is to get into the tower. Which, again, like, in doing that, you're confirming that, like, he's doing the whole twin thing. You know, the whole twim thing, I should say. Mm-hmm. I mean, I shouldn't, but I will. And, you know, it's like, and Walter has always felt like Roland's equal opposite. And he confirms that when he's like, much like Roland, all he wants is to get to the tower.
Right.
But then we learn that the only people, at least Walter believes, that the only people who were able to open the tower are Roland and Mordred, right? Mm-hmm. So, he's gonna use Mordred to help him kill Roland because he hates Roland so much, and then he's gonna kill Mordred and cut off his foot and use that to open the tower.
Which is, like, what is this? Is it a friggin', like, thumbprint scanner? Like, why is it that easy? It just, the whole thing, and the fact that he's like, was it too late to be God overall? Oh, that's all his goal is? He just wants to rule everything? That's boring. I would rather have, like, had him die without knowing that's even what he wanted.
Well, it's weird because it says that's what it says, was it too late to be God overall? But then, like, almost immediately after, I think it says that all he wants is to see what's at the top of what's in the room at the top. Okay. Which is what Roland has said. And Walter has consistently said in previous books, the room at the top of the tower is empty. Like, I know the room at the top of the tower is empty, which has frequently been interpreted to mean, like, there is no God, right?
Right.
And, like, even if I fully understood whether or not that was true, I wouldn't tell you, obviously. But that's what he has said before. So, like, yeah, what really is his motivation? I mean, he thinks there is no God, but he wants to be God. Like, maybe he thinks the room at the top is empty, so if, like, you walk into it, you become God?
Right. That it's basically an empty control room.
Yeah.
It's a Dogen for the universe.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Maybe that is what he thinks. But again, it feels like when King sets up the fact that only Roland and Mordred can open this door, it sets up Mordred as Roland's twin. And for that to happen, like, Walter needs to die, because the old twin needs to die in order for the new twin to be born or something. I mean, that's how it feels, right? So, you know, kind of Roland is Christ, Mordred is Antichrist, that kind of deal. So it's like, it really feels like King just kind of had this other idea, and once he started running with it, he had to get rid of the old chick because it just didn't fit anymore. Like, Walter just doesn't fit anymore. Because King has brought in a new villain, even though he already had one.
And you know what kills me is that how much more amazing would it be if Walter showed up and murdered the shit out of Mordred out of nowhere?
Ha!
Like, that would be on par with The Shining and what's-his-face traveling all the way there through the ice and snow to help him, and then just getting bashed in, his head had bashed in with a snow shovel. Like, you have this whole build-up, and her pregnancy, and the whole thing, and he seems really scary because he's part spider, and here comes this ancient man who is sick of this bullshit and is tired, and is just like, no, I don't think so. You're a child, you're a literal baby, and just shoot his face in, and that's it. That is a story. That's what he should have done.
I'd have read that. I mean, I read this, but like, I would have enjoyed that more.
I just don't really. And I'm trying to withhold judgment until I see where this is all going. But I just don't see the advantage to essentially replacing Walter with Mordred. I just don't really understand it. Like, even the idea that Mordred has these mental powers, you could tell me that Walter had them, and I'd believe you, because I don't know. We haven't gotten to see that much of him. And he showed Roland, like, the boundaries of the universe at the end of the first book. How the fuck do I know what he can do?
And before that, he makes an entire town go insane.
Right?
Like, he's, and he does everything he does in Wizard and Glass when they find him at the Emerald City or whatever. Like, it's, and I think he does some shit in Roland's flashbacks in Wizard and Glass too. Like, he shows up and he pulls some shit. So it's like, it really is like, it's almost as though it's meant to give you an idea of how awesome Mordred is, but it comes off as like, oh, this guy sucked the whole time.
Yeah.
And just like, he was really good at fooling people and pretending he was great, but he actually was terrible.
Yeah, it just really retroactively takes the heat out of a bunch of moments, which is just a shame.
Yeah. So we should also say that according to Walter, the writer Stephen King is going to die very soon, having only finished 4 books in the series that he needs to finish. Says by the summer of 1997, King had clearly known the story of the wolves, the twins, and the flying plates called Arizas. But to the writer, all that had seemed like too much work. He had chosen a book of loosely interlocked stories called Hearts in Atlantis instead. And even now... Oh, sorry.
You're right there?
Yeah. And even now, in his home on Turtleback Lane, where he had never seen so much as a single walk-in, the writer was frittering away the last of his time writing about peace and love in Vietnam. It was true that one character in what would be King's last book had a part to play in the Dark Tower's history, as it might be... But that fellow, an old man with talented brains, would never get a chance to speak lines that really mattered. So that's what's happening with Stephen King.
I mean, and it's kind of amazing, to be honest. Like, he started off really strong, but then just became kind of a hack.
He says that later. There's a part where he's like, man, Stephen King, he was a really talented guy who just, like, wasted everything.
Yep. Like, well, he chose the right chapter to say that in.
Yeah, for real. Incidentally, the character that they're talking about from Hearts in Atlantis is one of the ones that we meet in the very next chapter.
Oh, all right. The one thing I will say about what happens with Walter, his death is pretty hard to read.
It's bad.
It's fucking brutal. Like, brutal isn't my eyeballs hurt reading the words. Like, I had to force myself to not put it down. Because there's a combo of things happening here. It's just the outright body horror of getting your eyeballs torn out. It's the, like, psychological fuckery of being forced to tear them out yourself.
Right.
It's the, like, tactile description of what it feels and sounds like as it's happening. And how long it goes on. It really goes on a minute.
Yeah, it does. And, like, Mordred is kind of taunting him, too, the whole time. And, like, being really sadistic about it.
Yep.
And, again, it's like... I get that it's meant to make me be afraid of the spider baby. But it really just makes Walter come off like he wasn't nothing.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, it really just... It just tears down... this character and doesn't really build up the new one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, we learned that the Crimson King has gone mad, officially, according to Walter.
Oh, yeah. What is this now? And I think this is part of it, too, is that he's like, well, you know, the Crimson King's nuts, and I'm nothing. So we've spent 7 books with these 2 baddies that are basically just taken out of the equation. Like, the one that's... The Crimson King is in the equation in that he is still alive. And that he has followers. But he himself doesn't feel... And maybe I'll be proven wrong, you know. But the fact that he's been sort of... I feel like his power's been taken away from him a little bit with this just being put out there the way that it has.
And again, we talked about it. It comes so out of nowhere. Like, the first inkling we get about it is Roland's like, I have a feeling that he's crazy.
Right.
And then Walter's like, oh yeah, he's crazy. And then later, the other characters they run to are like, oh yeah, he's totally crazy. So, it's basically confirmation.
I do not understand this. I'm not missing anything, right? Like, there was no explanation in that moment as to why he thought this, really. Right?
Walter?
No, Roland.
Oh, Roland. No, there was no explanation whatsoever.
I just don't.
You just had a feeling.
It seems so... It feels like the sort of thing that would happen if a writer died and someone else finished the book series for them and they didn't know what the fuck to do.
That's interesting that you say that, considering, you know, what this is all kind of about.
Yeah, I just... You know? Maybe that's it. Maybe maybe the Crimson King took over writing the rest of the book series.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
Had Mordred kill this guy. That would be kind of amazing.
And Crimson King is like, I'm fucking crazy. What would be the stupid thing to do? I know. I'll take the villain of the piece and just toss him out the window. Yep. Because I'm crazy.
Oh, nutty. So, yeah, so that, and oh, you know what? There was another thing. Hold on. Let me find this. This is so hard to navigate. I'm going to see if is there a... Okay, yeah, let's see. Because when Mordred, he says, okay, here it is. When he, you know, he says like his Walter's 1,000+ years of knowledge was like pumping through his veins or something, right?
Yeah, like it was like into his brain, bellowed in his brain.
So then Mordred goes and follows the trail that Walter left until he figures out the spot where, like, Walter and the quartet split up, and follows the quartet to the doorway that he needs to go through.
Right.
I'm going to read this. He approached the door, reared up before it, and pawed at it questioningly. Too bad, really. There wasn't a peephole. And it probably would be safe to go through now. What had Walter said? That Roland's quartet meant to release the breakers, whatever they might be. It had been in Walter's mind, but Mordred hadn't bothered looking for it. Well, what the fuck, though? I thought all of his knowledge was pumping through your veins, guy. Either it's there or it's not. If you didn't look for it in the instant that it was there, it's just gone forever, but you can still remember all this other shit via eating him?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, King's writing tricks are getting less subtle if they were ever subtle to begin with, right? It's like, well, which, you know, it's like, I guess they don't want you to know what the breakers are quite yet, like King doesn't? Is that the reason? It must be.
If it is, then don't even mention it had been in Walter's mind. Don't say anything, and just be cool, man. Just try and be cool for like a second, but you keep having to fuck with shit.
Yep.
And if there's like a difference between types of knowledge, tell me that. anything to explain this because it is a direct contradiction of something just like a page ago that you went out of your way to tell me. You know, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I got nothing for you on that. I'm sorry.
Guys, I'm starting to lose my patience here.
Let's move on. We have this whole kind of lengthy bit where the Katet wakes up, they call for Nigel for a while, realize he's probably done. Mm-hmm. And then Oi leads them to the next door?
Right.
Basically, they find like a rolling table for Susanna to sit on, which they make a big deal about that. Mm-hmm. I do enjoy Eddie and Susanna's banter during these chapters, as I always do.
Yes.
And I also really enjoy in the next chapter when like when they're being super polite to each other about the binoculars, and Ted is like, "Will you fucking please stop?"
Ted is a little on edge.
Yeah, but we'll get to him. So they go through this room. It's a bunch of the Doombots, like inoperative, just kind of hanging out.
And this is when we get a callback to Eddie having said, "These are the halls of the dead."
Yeah.
You said that in a weird way.
I forgot about that. I was thinking about it earlier and I forgot about it. And then I had a thought about it when I was rereading it, and I forgot what that was.
Yeah, he says, all is silent in the halls of the dead. These are the halls of the dead where the spiders spin and the great circuits fall quiet one by one.
Right.
And then...
So that's after they pass the Doombots.
Right.
When they find the door with the lightning bolt on it.
And apparently Eddie doesn't realize that he said it out loud. He thinks he only thought it to himself. So when Roland's like, "Yeah, and do you remember the part with the rooms of ruin?" He's like, "Wait, what?" But yeah, so is that now okay? I'm starting to be not charitable here, but I'm starting to feel like that's the thing. Did Stephen King look back at his older work, come across the part where Eddie says that, really feel like the rooms of ruin and spiders spinning was a great image that he should build on, and that was what drove him to do this whole Mordred thing?
God, it's possible. It's a weird thing to latch onto.
Yeah, our brains do that, though, don't they?
Yeah.
We'll latch onto things, and once we go to somebody else... I remember when I was in high school and, applying to colleges, I had built up this huge portfolio of artwork, and I was going through it, and I pulled this one... I think I did it with, Craypaw. Remember Craypaw? The,
God.
Kind of pastels, kind of, oil...
Yeah, vaguely.
And they do this really, really saturated color that I love. And I pulled it out and I was like, this is my favorite thing I've ever done. And everybody in the room was like, why? That one? And everybody else, there was a little disagreement, but there were two pieces that pretty much everyone else agreed were my two best. And I was shocked. I really was. They were, I didn't see it. And I was in love with this other one that to them was just so immature, I think. But it was the colors and the sweep of it. And there was something about it that just, for me, it was the thing. And I just imagine with writing, it has to be the same way, right? Where there's this idea and you can't seem to stop thinking about it and nobody else gives a shit, but you decide this is what it's all about. And I've already said I'm not impressed with the whole idea of Mordred in the first place, because doing this whole Arthurian thing, it's just been done so to death. It really, really has. And I think that's secretly what I told you about hoping that, like, the idea that maybe Walter shows up and just kills Mordred. I think I'm secretly just hoping that's going to happen because I don't give a shit about Mordred. He's new to the scene. He's literally a baby. And even though he's, like, obviously growing up at an accelerated rate, I haven't gotten to know him. He doesn't have motivations that feel like anything that matter. And all it is this, like, it almost feels one step away from, like, a prophecy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, and that's one of the weird things is, like, I totally get what you're saying about, you know, favoring, you know, something you do, like, favoring a piece of your work over a different piece of your work, even though everybody else likes the second one. Or even, like, an element of one piece of work, right? Like, oh, you really like that part? Man, I was kind of phoning that in. I really like this part. Like, that's one thing. It's another thing to be like, man, you know what I really don't care about? The villain of the piece. But you know what I really do care about? That fucking random-ass poem that Eddie talks about in that one chapter. And, like, this chapter, The Door to Thunderclap, chapter 4 in part 2, this chapter's fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a whole lot of nothing. And, like, I looked over it again because I didn't want to sell this chapter short. I'm looking for character development. I'm looking for, like, interesting interactions. Is there anything here? Like, you know, I won't say if there's anything that moves the plot forward or not or foreshadows anything, but, like, you know, is there any action on a character level? Because on a physical level, they just walk. They walk to the door and they go through. And it really seems like the whole point of the thing is to call back to that poem. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a weird thing to care about. Like, as a writer, it's a weird thing to care about, like, making your story sync up with that, and not all these other things that I think most people would call more important, if not everyone. It's such a weird decision, and it's like, yeah, I agree. I think it's just a matter of, like, you know, wow, you really thought this was important. That's weird. Because, like, I really could care less. I was going to wait until a little bit later to ask you the official "Do you care about Mordred?" question. No. But I already got my answer. Because I don't care about him either. Like, I could not care less.
I was hopeful that if we did get into Mordred's head, or if we met some characters who got close to Mordred, that something would surface about who he was, that he would actually turn out to maybe be somebody that we had met before, incarnated somehow. I had no real... I hadn't thought enough about this to really have formulated, like, any hopes and dreams in that department. But I wanted it... I wanted something that felt like it mattered from the beginning of the story. And instead, It's not only does he look like a baby, but he's got daddy issues. That's his thing, is that he wishes that he could be part of Roland's quartet, except that he doesn't want to bow to him because he wants to run things, because the son kills the father and takes the father's place. It's the most trite thing. It's absolutely bare minimum motivation. It barely even counts as motivation, to be honest. And the fact that he's aging rapidly, like, unless his brain really ages rapidly with him and we come to find out all this other stuff, what his body looks like doesn't fucking matter. You can have him stay a baby the whole time if you wanted. As long as, like, you could have him be a fucking Stewie and have him just be brilliant, but, like, incapable, which would be kind of hysterical. But you have him have these powers and be incapable, but the brilliance isn't quite there. It's just this, like, push to survive on a very basic level that's really, really boring.
I honestly think that what happened is that King decided, in the wake of the accident, you know, and we've heard the stories about the people who wrote him letters, you know, wanting to know how the Dark Tower ended because they had cancer or whatever, you know. I think he decided that the only way to make himself finish the story, which he clearly didn't want to. Mm-hmm. Like, everything that we're hearing about in these chapters is an admission that he had no drive to finish this.
Yeah.
And I think what he decided was the solution was to make it as personal and as rooted in himself and who he is as possible. I think the reason Mordred is a spider is because the shit he talked about in the last book about fucking seeing spiders in the chickens was real. Like, I think he has that memory, and that's what drove the creation of this character. Or at least its incarnation as a red spider. Because it feels to me like he couldn't do it unless he turned it into this big thing and made it about him and about his life and about the accident. You know?
Right.
And it's like, and we're seeing now, I mean, at least I'm seeing, and I haven't thought about this since we first talked about it way back at the beginning of the show, but what we're seeing right now is the reason that he had to go back and revise the Gunslinger to make it make any kind of sense.
I'm really bummed, guys. Like, I'm sorry,
I don't mean to bum you out.
It's not you. It's not you. It's just, I've been really trying to restrain my criticism and stay open-minded and hopeful. And the more we get into this, the more it feels like he is just throwing a bunch of stuff down the drain. And it's almost, it feels like I didn't need to read the first 6 books. You know? Like, honestly, it kind of just feels like I could have read the second half or the last third of book 6 and this book. Maybe the last third of book 5 because of the fight with the wolves, but even that isn't really...
What if you just started at 5? Like, say you gave somebody 5 and was like, this is the first book.
Now, see, this is the thing, is that 5, you get the whole thing with the Kala and what's happening with the kids and this whole setup of everything, which is really well done to a degree, Kamala withstanding. But then you get this fight with the wolves that's super underwhelming. And after that fight, you get, again, a very perfunctory explanation of the breakers and the point of taking the kids from what's-his-face? Ben's dad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Slightman.
And it's so lacking in detail, and it's information that we could have had earlier on, or at least like theories about or anything. Hints, he could have written something into the story to like, because when he's telling this, I believe he's talking to Roland when he explains it, and Roland seems utterly unsurprised. So How about we have Roland being like thinking out loud and wondering if this is the possibility here before we just get some guy just telling us.
Right.
We didn't even get that information as a result of the battle with the wolves. It's just a guy who turns right before the battle.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel earned, really. And so, like, I don't, like, yeah, you could start with book 5, But to be honest, the setup with the Calla doesn't feel like it matters at all anyway. It just, all we need is Ben Slightman's confession, in a couple paragraphs, to start off book 6, and stick that, cut the first 2/3 off of book 6, stick Ben Slightman's confession in there, and from there, that's all the stuff that actually seems to matter and pay off so far. Again,
yeah. And I want to emphasize that what I've said before, which is that, like, rereading this, I feel the exact same way. And, like, I remember when I was reading Song of Susanna, what I felt was, like, man, this is all super fun. Like, I'm really enjoying this. But, like, you had better be able to stick this landing, dude, because you got a lot of shit going on. There's a lot of turbulence in this book. Mm-hmm. And if you can't stick the landing right, then it's gonna really be a mess. And this part of the book with Walter dying was the first part where I was like, you're not gonna do it, are you?
He doesn't even seem aware that this is a problem, which is the part that's really concerning. Right.
Now, I want to, this is a conversation that I think we're going to come back to a lot.
Okay. As
we finish up this book. And, I'll be very interested to see how your thinking changes, or if it changes. But yeah, I mean, I feel the exact same way. Even me knowing how it ends and knowing how I feel about how everything turns out, and having lots of thoughts about that I obviously can't share. I feel your frustration, and I share it, because at this point in the book, it really feels like, Jesus, you just wanted to write about your fucking childhood, didn't you? You just wanted to write about your neuroses. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what interested you. What interested you was yourself. And it's almost like, and I don't know if it's just, if it's just a matter of, like, it happened too quickly. I'm kind of wondering if, like, this is a good argument against the people like me who have been railing against George Martin to finish his book series as quickly as possible. It's like, yeah, but he might rush it and you get Dark Tower.
Right.
But, yeah, I just wonder if, like, if he was rushed, or I wonder if it all just came to him, and if it did all just come to him, if it just came to him because he was kind of doing a narcissistic thing.
It's really, anyway. I love that you just said that, because that was what I was thinking on my drive home. I read everything, then I went out to my Zumba class and then headed home, and I was thinking about it on my way home. And that was actually the conclusion that I came to also, was that, like, fundamentally it feels like all of this has circled back around to just be about Stephen King and what he feels like. And I was really grappling with that concept. Ultimately, really, I feel like art is kind of about the artist much more than a lot of us, like, tend to realize when it's set up for consumption. Right? We think about it as being like, well, you really need to, keep your readers in mind and please your fans and whatever. And even in that, it still can inadvertently be very much more about the writers. But I feel like Stephen King, he's reached this level of fame, and that's what it is that he really can sidestep that whole thing because people are going to buy it. It's the 7th book in a series that people have been, like, clamoring for forever. So he can completely indulge himself here. And what's going on with it, with him involving himself directly into his own story this way, is so... It's almost like we're watching him go through some sort of weird therapy or, like, writer's conference thing where he's, like, dealing with his own writer's block, but in the most public way imaginable.
Right. And the fact that he almost died.
Right. Which is, like,
So,
essentially what I felt like Bag of Bones was also. The whole first half of that book is about writer's block and him struggling with publishers and the industry having certain expectations of him and pitting him against other writers and this whole thing. And it was a very different part, like an industry look, but it still felt like this is so all about you, dude. So I guess that he's just kind of like that. And previously he's been able, I mean, how many books has he written where the main character's a writer?
Many.
And now he's literally the writer by name in the story. It really kind of feels inevitable once you really step back and look at his body of work that eventually he'd come to this point. Yeah.
I can't argue with that. Let's move on because we still got a lot to talk about before we're done here. But yeah, let's come back to all this. They go through a door and they all throw up because it's sickening for some reason. And then they run into 3 people who take them to the top of a mountain and kind of let them in on the situation. So, the first notable person here is Ted Brodigan, who is the character from Hearts in Atlantis that Walter mentioned.
Right.
Bobby Garfield, who he mistakes Jake for a couple of times, is another main character in Hearts in Atlantis.
Okay.
And Hearts in Atlantis, which I read on the recommendation of fans of this show when I was kind of getting ready to read this book. I read some of the. I was told by some people, like, hey, here's some stuff you might want to check out before it comes up, you know. So I did. Hearts in Atlantis is boring as fuck.
Is it?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Interesting.
But this guy, like, if you want some shit where it's like you're reading along, going like, is something gonna happen anytime soon? It's like if Wizard and Glass like wasn't a fantasy. In terms of its pacing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so, like, it's bad. But Ted Brodigan is, like, this dude who makes friends with this kid, and, you know, occasionally he talks about Ka, and he's clearly, like, from somewhere else, and the kid's mom is the worst, and he eventually, like, he tells the kid, he hires the kid to, like, watch out for the low men, for the Cantoi, because they're looking for him. And the kid, like, drops the ball. And then I think something like his mom tells him where Ted is. Anyway, they catch Ted in that story and they bring him back. So when he's talking about, like, later he talks about how he tried to run. And he runs all the way back to 1960.
Oh, my God.
So
okay.
that's Hearts in Atlantis. The story of him trying to run and being dragged back to Algul Siento, the Blue Heaven.
Right.
Is not all of Hearts in Atlantis, but, like, the first... Because Hearts in Atlantis is kind of a collection of short stories that are loosely linked. So it's the first story in Hearts in Atlantis.
Okay.
And then we have Dinky, who is a younger guy. He's from the short story Everything's Eventual. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about him right now because I think it might be kind of a spoiler for what happens later, but we can talk about him later if you want.
Okay.
And the third guy turns out to be Shimi.
This was just wonderful.
Wasn't it great?
This was the one thing out of these 3 chapters that I was cheering about.
I know exactly the feeling. When I saw that it was Shimi, I was so fucking happy. They kept hinting with the way that Roland was talking to him and acting like he sort of knew him, and I couldn't figure it out. Yeah, I know. And I had completely forgotten that Shimi had, like, a sense of things. Yeah. You know, I had completely forgotten. So it never even entered my mind, you know, and I'm not sure even if I'd remembered that I would have thought of that. At one point, one of the guys says Stanley Ruiz. And that name, like, rang a bell, because that was the bartender who was his dad. Oh, okay. But I didn't figure it out until like, just about the reveal actually happened. Yeah, I think that
that was like the one thing at the end of Wizard and Glass that I was like, but what happens to Shamey?
Yeah.
And I was really concerned about him because he's just so lovable and sweet. And the fact that he thinks that everything is his fault is so hard. And the way that Roland like comforts him is really, really touching. And there's one person alive that remembers everything that Roland went through and remembers the woman that he loved and cares that this happened to her as much as Roland cares.
Yeah.
That is a massive emotional moment. Like, I'm just trying to imagine anything on that scale where you've got literally not a soul alive who can commiserate with you about one of the most traumatizing things you've ever experienced. And
it's huge, yeah.
There he is all of a sudden after all this time. Like, and hasn't aged, evidently, the same way. Like,
yeah, it seems like he's aged a little bit slower. But he was younger than Roland at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, but, you know, I picture Roland as being, like, probably, ancient. I think of him as being, like, 60 by now. You know, like, getting into that spot where things are just really starting to go downhill fast. Like, 65 is where things begin to unravel.
You know what's crazy is that when Walter is... Not to go back to this, because, like, I think Shamey coming back here is a great example of, like, King's priorities and our priorities lining up for once, where he's like, hey, you know who's important? Fucking Shamey. And we're like, yes, thank you.
Right?
Shamey's great, and I wanted him back, and I wanted to know more about him, and the fact that he's apparently some kind of psychic guy who, like, teleports people is awesome.
Right?
But one of the crazy things about what Walter reveals is that he tricked Roland into thinking that, like, hundreds of years had passed.
Yeah.
In his sleep, and it was just like he hypnotized him and dressed up some bones and walked away. Yep. Like, that actually pissed me off almost as much as Walter dying. Because it's like, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, he says in the book, like, his hair had gone gray, and he was, like, noticeably older. Like, what?
Yeah.
What are you doing? But, whatever, it's fine, because Shamey's here, and Shamey's great.
Yeah, I forgot. I meant to mention that, like, the idea that he just tricked him doesn't jive with what.
So dumb.
Like, I don't know what he's doing. This feels like something the DC universe would do in the movies. Some weird shit that they just decide, you know what, that really didn't work. We're going to do this other thing. And then they, like, retcon it, and everybody's like, wait, what?
You can shorten that, Natasha, to just say this feels like something the DC Universe would do, regardless of medium.
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. I have noticed that, actually, overall.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a noted DC hater, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, but yes. Where are we? Yeah, so Shamey's here, and they're all telling Roland and them about this fucking little town, Algul Siento, which is basically a little, like, college town, as they put it, for the Breakers. And the Breakers are apparently psychics whose job it is to you know, break the beams. I don't think we really know how they do it yet. But they can all
we
do...
don't really get that.
We know they can all do kind of something. And even though it's unclear what exactly it is, Dinky, at one point, I believe, opens a door, even though it's locked.
Yeah. So
he's got something going on, and they all speak about Ted like he's the most important one there. So that all happens, and a bunch of these dudes, they, you know, and I'm sure women too, they know what they're doing, and they try not to think about it. And it's great food, and you can have sex with simulated women, and it's fantastic. And there's movie nights, and, you know, it's run by some dude named Prentice and some other guy named the Weasel, apparently.
Yeah, the Weasel. I like that name a lot. That's very evocative. And, you know, I don't know, but it might very well be an actual weasel, because they are there are plenty of half human, half animal creatures around. Or not even half human, just mostly animal with a human skin face.
Right. But yeah, a lot of this chapter is kind of devoted to Ted and Dinky kind of explaining to the gang, like, why people would do this. And how did you feel about that? Like, the whole... They do the whole comparison with... What's the asshole with the cult?
Jones? Yeah. Well... All right, so I have a lot of feelings about this because he starts off comparing it to, like, these are people who had, like, felt like they had nowhere to go, which I don't get enough evidence that these people feel that way until he starts to talk about people who are ostracized or have, like, physical disabilities that cause them to be, you know, like, I can't remember. There's one where people's heads are really huge.
Yeah, it's, what is it? It's, fucking hydrocephalus.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple things like that. And I've always had a really weird aversion to the idea of using people with disabilities as, like, savants. And kind of tying those things together. Mm-hmm. I feel like I don't feel like it's completely unacceptable, but I feel like it has to be handled really carefully. But the idea here seems to be that he's saying, like, these are people who, because of their disabilities, felt like they had nowhere else to go. And I just don't really know enough about the situation to know if that is totally insensitive or not.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I was reading again this whole bit where, you know, with, where Jake says, I still can't believe it, all those people working to break the beams, I mean, no offense, but, and Dinky says, yeah, well, guess what, kiddo? I take offense. I take offense like a motherfucker. What do you know about what it's like to spend your whole life on the outside, to be the butt of the joke every time, to always be Carrie at the fucking prom? Which, good job, thank you for that, King. There are guys down there who can't walk or talk. One chick with no arms, several with hydrocephalus, which means they have heads out to fucking New Jersey. Poor old Stanley here. He's one of the ones who can't talk, even though he can. Just doesn't. Mm-hmm. And at that point, they kind of go away from this conversation, which I honestly don't remember the extent to which it's revisited. Like, I don't remember if they even talk about it again. I think they do, but this is a little fucked up as a justification, and I feel like it's being presented as not that.
Yeah.
Because Dinky kind of... I hate saying his name. Dinky kind of makes his point, and then they move on, right?
Right.
Without really any chance to respond, and it doesn't really seem anyone has much desire to. And I don't know. I think it takes on a real different sense, this kind of justification for doing anything in the light of where our culture is right now. Because you've got, you know, we've had Gamergate, and we've had everything that came out of Gamergate, and the justification for all this harassment and awful behavior has been, well, we've been oppressed all our lives because we're nerds. And that is not a justification. And this guy is not disabled.
Right.
At least not that anyone can see. He seems to be perfectly ambulatory. He seems to have no problem speaking. In fact, he talks way more than I would prefer he did. And he's, you know... And again, like, obviously, I'm not going to talk shit about anyone coming to the defense of, like, oppressed, like, groups that even though you don't actually belong to the group. But it's a little bit thin when you're saying, like, this is our justification for destroying the universe.
Right. Yeah.
which is that we're all outcasts. Look at that guy. And you're like, what about you, buddy? Like, who made you an outcast? And is it really that bad, whatever happened to you, that you want to kill the Earth and you're not going to think about the consequences?
And this is a really good example of King not delving deeper into something that I really want to know more about. When he says, what do you think it's like being Carrie at the prom? What the fuck is that? Did you kill an entire school full of people? Because if he's living with that kind of power that can go so wildly out of control, then okay, sure, I see your point in this conversation. But I don't know that. He doesn't tell me. He doesn't give me enough.
I mean, he's saying, spend your whole life on the outside, be the butt of every joke, to always be Carrie at the fucking prom. I mean, he's talking about, like, her being made fun of by the other kids, right? And, like, I'm not sure Carrie at the prom refers to lashing out with psychic rage so much as having fake blood dumped on her.
Now, see, that's my question. I assumed that it meant lashing out with psychic rage, because that's why he's been recruited, is he has psychic power.
Mm-hmm.
But does he tell me that?
No.
And if somebody wants to be an ally for people who are marginalized, fine, but he's insinuating that the fact that these people live with these handicaps and problems are that this is, like, their reasoning. I don't want to hear that from him. I don't buy it from him. I need more than that, and I'm just getting this, like, scratching the surface moment, and it's not enough, and it feels really ableist on his part to just be like, it's sort of reminding me of when Stephen Hawking died, and everybody was sharing these memes of him, like, leaving his wheelchair and being like, oh, now that he's gone, he's finally free. And it's like, y'all know that the wheelchair is what freed him in life, right?
Right.
But, like, that was an enormous tool and advantage for him. And the idea that once you're dead, you're fixed and become like everyone else, because that's what we all want and is a gift from God. That's a really gross place to come from. And I know that it's, like, meant well, but ew. Come on, like, just don't. So I feel like he's kind of just teetering on the edge of that a little bit with this. I don't know. It made me really uncomfortable.
The other part of the problem, too, is that it's not much of a justification for what they're doing. Like, it's really thin. It's like, well, hey, why are you guys, like, why are you guys basically being bribed with food and sex to destroy the universe?
Right.
And he's like, well, it's because we've been oppressed our whole lives. Mm-hmm. And it's like, dude, that's not a reason for anything. What you're saying is, like, you've had some shit happen to you, so you've earned the right to do whatever you want, and nobody's allowed to question you.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you're saying, is that it's not that you're doing the right thing, it's that how dare you question me because of the shit that I've been through. And not only is that, again, coming from him, fucking ableist as hell, but it's also just like, fuck you, man. Like, I think I can still question why you're, like, I don't care what you've been through. Why are you willing, you're going to kill the world because you got to have sex with Nicole Kidman and Marilyn Monroe? Like, really? Is that, because I don't think I would do that. And I've, not saying I've been through as much shit as you have, but, like, I don't know. I don't think it's a very good reason.
Yeah, it feels really... I mean, there's this thing that people are saying now, which is that, like, we're talking about, a lot of different things going on in the world where people try and explain it away with mental illness or societal upbringing or whatever. And the thing that people are clapping back with is it's an explanation, not an excuse.
Yes.
And even that feels generous here. it's barely an explanation.
Right, it's barely an explanation, but it's certainly not an excuse.
And it feels so... It feels almost like Stephen King is like dry snitching, which is when somebody inadvertently tells on themselves about something that they didn't realize that they're kind of like... But the fact that these people are all white dudes right now that they've met that are doing this, I know we've been told that there are people who are differently abled and that there are women and whatnot. We've been told that, but we're not seeing that yet. And they're the ones that are over here trying to sort of justify this in these, again, feeble terms. Feels really appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that Dinky might not be white.
No?
I'm not positive, but I feel like, because I don't remember Everything's Eventual very well, although I did read it.
It's a great sign.
I mean, sorry. I mean, his last name is Earnshaw, so he probably is white, but he says, like, I think he says immediatamente in the chapter, and everything, and I thought of him for whatever reason as being Latino. So I don't know if he is or not, but I mean, if he is, he definitely doesn't. He's fairly well coded white, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot in his behavior or in his attitude to tell you he's not.
Yeah, and like, to be honest, the using of immediatamente, there's so much like low-key Spanish in Magus and the Cala and whatnot that I kind of just wrote it off as being like part of that.
That's true. I didn't think about that.
And it might not be, but like, I just sort of, it got my attention a lot at first, and then it fell to the background because I realized that it really wasn't going to turn into anything. So
Shimi is actually the one who has Ruiz as a last name, which, is interesting. But yeah, but I know what you're talking about. These don't strike you particularly as like the most oppressed people in the world. Especially Ted, when Dinky goes through his whole like life story in a heartbeat. And Ted seems to be the one who is, the motor behind all this. There's a bit here as well where Ted tries to get them to tell him if they've actually been eating kids' brains, and they won't, which I thought was weird.
I know.
Like, I don't really understand why they're not doing it.
It just felt really out of character to me. Like, since when is Roland worried about being tactful? Jake not wanting to tell them, I could see. But
Jake thinks to himself, so you can eat yourself alive instead of them.
Yeah. And that makes 100% sense for Jake.
Yeah.
But even for Susanna, I could see that. But Eddie would blurt shit out without thinking. And Roland would just say it because that's what happened. And that's all there is to it. So the fact that they all refused to say, and it was like an individual, like, I'm going to each of you and asking you individually, will you tell me? And you will each decline. That was so strange to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I don't know. He clearly suspects and like has suspected, so I feel like Roland would have just told him at least. I guess I don't get why it's like the biggest deal in the world, because like it's interesting because these three are clearly like not quite free from the spell of this place they've been living. So it's like, it's almost like, because they even look back at it and talk about it sort of longingly. And Ted is the most hardcore, like, I'm gonna fucking, I'm the one who ran away guy. But even he's like, maybe doesn't want to believe that he was actually doing something really bad, which he would if he knew he was eating children.
Right.
But like, I don't know. I think their silence also kind of confirms it. personally. Like, if he wasn't, you would have told him.
Yeah.
Like, no, man, you weren't eating kids. What are you talking about? So, I don't know. They're gonna leave him there for the night and come back the next day. There's a bunch of supplies and, like, weapons and shit in there. Mm-hmm. Because they've been planning this for a while, it seems. Or planning something, at least.
Right.
Because they're kind of there to meet Roland and Eddie when they show up. So they definitely have some kind of plan or scheme hatchery occurring.
Yeah, I want to know that. How do they know they're coming?
Yeah.
We don't get that, do we? I didn't miss that.
Not in this chapter, I don't think.
Okay.
So, yeah, and then we have a thing with Shimi, and it's really sweet.
It really is.
And it's just really, really sweet. He's sad because he thinks he shouldn't have let Susanna die. Or not Susanna, Susan.
Yeah.
And Roland tells him it's not his fault, and yeah, I mean it's just really, like, it's a really great moment.
It is.
And Roland says, we always knew you were special. You know. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I really, like, I honestly just, like, and this is, I think I was just so hungry for this callback type moment. Mm-hmm. That I wanted this to just go on for longer than it did.
Right.
Because it's just really, I've been so starved for people that I really care about getting their due.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all right. So that's that.
That's that. So let's do 2 chapters next time. Is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Is that cool by you?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna I'm gonna text you and ask for sure. But
that's fine. Yeah. But yeah, that's these chapters. I thought it was nice to kind of end on Shimi coming back. It was good stuff, and I know we were downers for most of this because we're not feeling what King is doing here.
Yeah.
But you know, that's the way it's got to be, and hopefully we will change our minds as we continue through this journey to the Dark Tower. I don't know why I'm, like, doing this like I'm wrapping it up. Like,
I know, I was like, what's happening here?
I don't know. I have no idea what's going
on.
Ignore me.
Pull out a voice modulator or something. To the Dark Tower.
Dark Tower.
Yeah, I feel bad because I know people love this series, and it's always hard for me, no matter how long I do this, to hate on something that I'm aware is close to a lot of people's hearts. I went through this recently with Twin Peaks.
I mean, I love this series. Like,
I know, and that's the thing is, like, I'm just hoping that people understand the difference between shitting all over something and criticizing it when it deserves it.
Yeah.
You know, because I think there's a thing that happens, and don't get me wrong, I'm so guilty of this also. But if people really get into a fandom for something, or they read something from a really early age, and so it's part of their identity in a way.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
They interpret criticism of that thing as a criticism of them. And I can understand why it feels that way, because sometimes, especially if somebody's criticizing an aspect of something you love that it never even occurred to you was problematic, it can feel like an attack on you because how did I never think of that? And maybe the fact that I never thought of it is because it's not actually a problem and you're reading into it. Or it could be that I missed it, which is a kind of scary thought when it's something that you love and you feel like you've parsed to death and somebody's pointing out stuff you've never noticed before. So I don't, I really want people to understand when I start to get hard on things that it's not a reflection on you, and you can like things that I don't like, and that's fine. You can like things that I have a problem with, and you have a complete right to do that. But there are just going to be things that I can't talk around it and not admit how disappointed I am. And this is a particularly egregious cluster of chapters that I just don't know what he's doing. I really don't.
The first one in particular, yeah.
Yeah. The first one in particular, and then the third one has some weird stuff that, like, it didn't really occur to me immediately on the outside because the first chapter was so what the fuck that I was a little distracted. But then when I stopped to think about it, the third chapter has some problems. And then the second chapter, like you said, it's a lot of nothing. And then a sort of like reference to something that is from way back that feels like, is that why you are doing this? Which makes me angry more than anything. It's like, I'm sitting here talking about how I really want things to tie back from earlier. And he did that, but in the most, like, frustrating way that he could possibly have done it. Which is to say, I'm going to focus on this one weird thing and use that as justification to undo everything else, which is just so strange. And again, I'm not sure that that's what really was going on there. But at the point that I'm at right now, it feels like something like that happened. Like, I don't know. So, yeah. And I'm still trying. I'm still like that Billy Bumbler, hoping to believe. Like, I'm trying to keep an open mind. I still am. But I'm going to say when things are just nonsense. Because it's not like... I feel like Stephen King has this... there's this approach to his work that I feel like people will either be like, this book was great, but that book was trash. Or he really loses it around this point in his career, which may be true. I haven't read enough of his stuff to know. Right. But I am feeling like he does intersperse a lot of nonsense, even within good stuff. Like, there's big chunks of he could have taken a lot out of it. And it still would have been massive because I feel like a lot of that book does need to be there. But still. So he just has... I think that King gets maybe a little bit more slack than he deserves because he just knocked it out of the park so hard from the beginning. Kind of like... what's his face? Director. Jaws.
Oh, Spielberg.
There you go. That's the one.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation about what kind of career he's had.
Let's see. Well, I'm not doing it.
I will say that we're gonna. I think our chapter rate, just looking forward over the rest of like part 2. Mm-hmm. I think our chapter rate's gonna slow down a little bit.
Okay.
So next week we'll cover 2, and then I think there will be at least a few times during this part where we're only doing 1 because they're long enough and enough happens. But yeah, you get shit like fucking the door to Thunderclap or whatever, and it's like, well, there's nothing. They walked for a while. And they found a door,
and we followed Oi, and I don't know. Maybe he thinks that we wanted more of them as a group together because I did say, I think that I had like. I'm trying to remember what I said last episode, but I think I did say something like I would appreciate some more getting to hear the actual chit chat between them all about sharing what happened. But that's what's so weird is that like we hear that they shared, but we don't get to see their reactions or hear what they say to each other in regard to that. And then we get this chapter of him talking about them walking, and I'm like, why didn't we get to see the other thing?
And there's a moment in that chapter where they walk in there and Jake starts laughing, and then like Eddie and Susanna start laughing, and Roland thinks how great it is that they're all laughing together again. But like, I didn't really understand why. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like King is like he knows what moment he wants, but at least in this case, like he doesn't know how to really deliver it. He doesn't know how to make it come naturally and like make it feel earned, like you were saying before. Mm-hmm. So. He's kind of reduced to saying, like, oh, and now they were laughing together, and that's character development. It's, like, not really how it works, buddy.
And also, not for nothing, but could fucking Susanna have mentioned that she heard Stephen King died on the radio throughout that
Oh
walk
my
at
God.
some point?
Oh my God.
Just saying.
Just do it. You're all remembering who that guy is. It's fine.
They talk about him again, I think, during that walk, right? I don't remember. Maybe they don't, but...
It's either during the walk or on the mountain. I don't know. But yeah, that's gonna always be a thing. It's like, come on now. Really?
Yeah.
She's like super smart. But again, it's, you know, it's the kind of thing where it's just the kind of thing where you feel like sometimes, like, you know, the characters are bending to what King feels like the story needs to do, and that just kind of sucks. Mm-hmm. And it really, it you know, it kills it doesn't kill anything, but it takes something out of the narrative when you do that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, we've been going on for a while now, Natasha. I feel like we should wrap this up.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so I just want to say, first of all, we have one new review. 5 stars by Exangelion from the United States. I hope I'm saying that right. This is one of the most entertaining podcasts I've listened to in quite a while, which is so nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As a longtime fan of the Dark Tower series, I always find it fun to hear the thoughts of newcomers to the series, and while I can't agree with everything said on the show, Miles' passionate dislike of The Lord of the Rings in particular baffles me. I find that Natasha and Miles have succeeded in giving me a new insight into one of my favorite book series, one that I have read roughly 7 or 8 times, so thanks for that. Wow. P.S. Miles, I'd love to get a chance to try and change your mind about Lord of the Rings.
I would love to have my mind changed about that, but I don't think it's going to happen.
He lied through his teeth. Please, I insist. Change my mind.
Look, Exangelion, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, which was, you know, us talking a bunch of shit about something you really like for about an hour. But yeah, I mean, maybe someday. So, like, over on my podcast, the Smash Fiction podcast, incidentally, Natasha, I don't know if you knew about this podcast, but it's the other one that I do. One of the other ones that I do. So for Patreon, for patrons, we do bonus content. Like, all the hosts of Smash Fiction take turns doing bonus content for our patrons, and my bonus content has so far been appropriately me having a discussion about something that everybody else loves that I hate. Although I guess that was the first one. The second one was more like, because the first one was about Terminator 2. The second one was about the Star Wars prequels, which most people dislike. But we have a Patreon or a patron poll to decide what the subject will be, and Lord of the Rings was on the poll. So hopefully someday, maybe someday, I'll be able to actually go into depth about why I don't like Lord of the Rings. Although it's not. It doesn't matter right now. But suffice to say, it's not. There's no like big like smoking gun. I just didn't really dig it.
I think it's hard when there is a huge series that laid the groundwork for so many other things, and then you, after consuming all the beautiful twists and turns of arguably more advanced and modern versions of it later on, you try and go back to the source. And one of two things can happen there. You can see where the foundation was laid, but now the original work kind of looks like a pale shadow of things that you really love. Or it holds up so well and you're blown away and you can't believe that this was written so long ago. You know, how you feel about it really is going to be determined by who you are. But I feel like people have asked me if I'd be interested in doing Lord of the Rings, and I have resisted it because of that. I read The Hobbit, and I read the first third of the first Lord of the Rings, and there were too many mountains. There are a lot of mountains, and
I was about to say, if it makes y'all feel any better, I really like The Hobbit. Like, I love that book.
The Hobbit's great. That one I read no problem.
Fantastic. Movies are crap, but, you know, that's another story.
They were so bad.
They were so fucking bad. And I love the Lord of the Rings movies. That's the weird thing. Like, I love the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah, same. I was obsessed with them for a while.
Yeah, me too.
But the books, it's just, I couldn't, like, I'll never forget, I reread the same, like, 4 paragraphs describing a valley. Like, I kept spacing out in the middle of reading it. You know how you do? And you realize, like, I've read these words, but I absorbed none of this. I have no idea what I just read. And so I kept going back and then spacing out in the middle of it. And it happened 4 times. And I was like, all right, you know what? Maybe I'm just really tired. And I put it away and I just never went back. I never could get it up. So I'm not like completely against it in concept, but I'm just really worried that I would have that reaction again and to disappoint everybody. Similar to my feelings on covering Doctor Who, just being worried about disappointing everybody on a beloved series that people are fanatic about. Fanatical.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right. And new patrons this week. Marlene Ullerlein, C. Hill, James Gilkerson, Haya Mutashar, Winona Moon, Kelsey Berthelot, Kate Miles, Heather, Christy Godsey, and Sheila Perryman all became patrons. Welcome to all of you. Thank you all so much. You're brilliant and wonderful people. I hope you know that by being a patron, you have elevated yourself beyond mere humanity and have ascended to a higher plane of existence and really can pat yourselves on the back for being fundamentally better than other people. So congratulations on that. If you'd like to join the patrons group, please, either there's a link when you join on Patreon, and that will lead you straight to it in the Facebook group, or you can DM me and get the address from me. I don't like to share it publicly in case some trolls and non-patron freeloaders try and show up and ingratiate themselves into the group, and then I realize that they're not a patron and have to unceremoniously boot them. So, y'all, definitely come and join us if you're a patron, because it's a super active group. There's a lot happening. And I had mentioned like a year ago at this point that I was starting a Slack. And I have become more and more concerned about Facebook going tits up, as Money so colorfully phrased it the other day. And I really want to have something in place in case something happens where I can still keep my community going, because that's really Unspoiled's about the community at this point more than anything. So the Slack group is I think a really more functional, to be honest, than Facebook in terms of being able to share with people and really connect with them in more effective ways. But because we all tend to just be on Facebook, we fall into doing that. And the Slack group that I made a year ago just completely died. Like, there's still a bunch of members, but nobody's on it. And I'd like to start to reinvigorate that a little bit. So if you're interested in being part of the Slack and you're our patron, also ask me for that and I will invite you using your email. I'm just trying to... It's hard sometimes to know where I should invest my time when it comes to social media. But things aren't looking super awesome for Facebook lately.
They are not.
And I really see more people being like, you know what? I can't be on here, not just because of what's going on, like in terms of data mining, but it's a lot with the climate the way it is, to like the mental load and labor of just signing in to just see your friends and be like, hey, I saw this cool movie, and be inundated with posts about yet another person of color gunned down by police and another school shooting and another EPA law has been repealed so we can just dump waste into the water supply.
Or the fact that Facebook is being used to, like, overthrow governments in other countries.
Yeah, you know, I think we could all use a platform where we can just get away from all of that and just have fun with people who like the stuff that we like without bringing all of that into it.
I mean, let's not go crazy with the liking stuff that all you people like. Let's not go insane with that.
So,
I'm talking to you, Owen. I'm talking directly to you, Owen.
Owen, tell Miles to go to hell.
Tell me to go to hell.
All right, so that's all I've got.
That sounded really dirty and kinky, like.
You,
tell
sir.
Tell me to go to hell, Owen.
Say it again, but slow.
Say it louder.
All right, go ahead. Do your plugs, mister.
All right, y'all. I'm gonna keep this short because we've been going a long time. So go to mjschneiderman.com for links to everything that I do. Check out the Smash Fiction podcast if you like hearing people talk about who would win in fights between fictional characters. We just came out with Captain Jack Harkness versus Captain Jack Sparrow. That was a pretty fun episode, and I managed to. If you're a patron of Smash Fiction, you get your name featured in like one of our opening segments, like the judge's opening scenario.
That's awesome.
And I was the judge in that episode, and as it happened, the patron in question was Krista. And I know Krista loves the Dark Tower, so I threw in a very like unnecessarily complicated to make it Dark Tower centric opening scenario. So
you're so considerate.
I'm pretty sure it is. There's no spoilers for the rest of this book in there, Natasha. So you can feel free to listen to it.
Awesome.
So Krista really enjoyed that, and so I hope everybody else does too. So check out the new episode of Smash Fiction. Check out the Odyssey Storytelling podcast, and check out my blog, Universes of the Mind, where there is definitely new content. And I don't know why you would say otherwise. What, you calling me a liar?
What do you mean?
All of you calling me? I'm a fucking liar, y'all. Anyway.
So Miles is going to go cool off. And we're going to, just put our expectations on the shelf for another week. And hope that when we come back with 2 more chapters that everything will have resolved itself into a tight and cohesive storyline that we care about. Right?
Let's do it. I am down to be optimistic about the next 2 chapters.
Whoop, whoop.
Fuck yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Leave a review if you haven't already to support us. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/unspoiledpod, Twitter at unspoiledshow, Instagram at unspoiledpodcast. You can email me at unspoiledpodcast@gmail.com, and you can become a patron at patreon.com/unspoiled. All right, so we'll see you next week. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.